In this video, I really want to talk about the good old ball and chain, the Carolina rig. I did a live video last night over on this channel, and I actually got a lot of questions about a Carolina rig. And with it kind of coming into the post-spawn time frame of the year, getting into May, June, July, these are all really good months to pick up a Carolina rig. So in this video, I'm going to talk all about Carolina rigs. We're going to talk about a few baits that I really like, as well as the setup that I go with when it comes to fishing the Carolina rig. Now, before we get into it, this video is brought to you by Fin Fishing Apparel. And right now for the month of May, so just about another week, there is a sale happening over at Fin Fishing. You can get a USA made sun shirt, which is one of the only ones made here in the US, and a duck hat. This is a waterproof, lightweight, highly durable hat for 75 bucks. So you save almost 20% on that order. All you gotta do, add the sun shirt that you want to cart, add the duck hat that you want to cart, and you will see that automatic discount at checkout. Shopping at Fin Fishing is surely one of the best ways to help support this channel, and I greatly appreciate it. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Carolina rig. Now, the first thing that I wanted to start out with was a couple of tips when it comes to fishing the Carolina rig. Then I'm gonna talk about my rod reel setup, and the last thing that I wanna talk about are baits. Baits are key with a Carolina rig, but I also think that you should not overcomplicate the baits that you put on the rig. So first, a couple of tips. One of the big things with the Carolina rig, and I'm assuming that most of you guys know how to set up a Carolina rig. It really just consists of some sort of weight. A lot of guys asked about what kind of weight that they should go with. I think that if you can afford to use a tungsten weight, always go with the tungsten weight because you are going to have a better feel of the bottom, which is kind of the point when you're fishing a Carolina rig. Now, if you can't afford the tungsten, you can go with a lead weight. As far as egg versus cylinder versus almost like a punching weight, I have used all of them. I don't see there being a huge difference. The biggest thing that you don't want to do is go too heavy with your weight. When you hear a lot of guys talk about a Carolina rig, you will hear a lot of guys talk about using a 1 ounce weight with a Carolina rig. Now, I do use a 1 ounce weight a lot, but I try to get away with the lightest weight that I can get away with while also maintaining good bottom contact. So I would say that for the most part, I'm using a 5/8 a lot to a 3/4. That's kind of where I live. If you fish a little bit over 20 plus foot of water, then that 1 ounce is really gonna come in hand. I've also used really lightweight Carolina rigs, 1/4 ounce weights up in, a foot of water, 2 foot of water, giving the bass something different. So that one of the biggest things that I can say, do not go with too heavy a weight. Try to use tungsten, and I don't think it really matters as far as the shape goes. I often use a big flipping weight, like a 5/8 or a 3/4 ounce flipping weight. That's just because I have a ton of them. They come through cover, they come through grass. I've also used the egg weights and cylinder weights. Like I said, I've not had issues, so I do not think it's a big deal what you go with as far as the weight. Now, when it comes to the Carolina rig, another big component, one of the biggest ones that I think is really important, is the hook that you use. And the biggest thing that you want to avoid when it comes to a Carolina rig is a hook that has too thick of a gauge of the hook, too thick a wire. The big thing about a Carolina rig, the reason it gets so many bites is because you're basically giving the bass a weightless presentation, but in any depth zone that you want. I mean, like I said, you can fish a Carolina rig in 25 foot of water, but because you have that long leader and a bait on the end of it, that bait is actually weightless, and so it looks extremely natural down there on the bottom. And if you use too heavy of a hook, it tends to draw that bait down a lot, and it kind of makes it look a lot more unnatural. So when I go with a Carolina rig hook, I really want something, I like to go with a medium wire hook. And there's kind of a happy medium there because you don't want to go too light because you are using, bait cast rod and reel equipment. And I'm going to talk about that here in just a moment. But you do not want to go too heavy on the hook. I've also seen that with a Carolina rig and a heavy hook. This is what I made the mistake of so much in the past, is that if you have a heavy gauge hook and you make a really, really long cast, which you can so easily do with a Carolina rig, and you go to set the hook, you are going to have trouble getting that hook past the barb, especially on those really thick hooks. So do not go with too thick of a hook. Also, don't go with too light of a hook, because again, you do have kind of a heavy line, rod and reel, and we'll talk about that again here in just a moment. But as far as the leader length goes, that's the other main component that I really want to quickly talk about before we talk about rod, reel, and line in the baits. When it comes to the leader length, I would say that my standard Carolina rig leader length is about 3 foot, about 36 inches. I think that the more pressured bodies of water that you fish, the longer that can be and the more bites that you will get. I don't necessarily believe there is a difference between a 4 foot long leader and a 6 foot long leader, which is gargantuan. I remember reading Bassmaster magazines and listening to guys talk about these giant leaders that they throw, which they're very difficult to throw a long leader. Anything past about 3 foot is fairly difficult to fish. And so anyways, I remember reading about these guys having these huge long leaders and how they believe that got them more bites. I just don't believe it. I don't necessarily believe it. I think that 3 foot is a really good all-around leader length. I think that sometimes you can actually go shorter than 3 foot, but I think 3 foot gives that bait enough play without giving it too much line. The other thing about a really, really long leader is that if a fish picks that up and it swims towards the weight, towards the boat, towards you, like you aren't going to feel, you're gonna pop a lot of slack in that line before you actually get a hook set into that fish, which is another really important thing. Another tip when it comes to the Carolina rig, when you set the hook, very, very important, reel a couple of times and then set into them. Because a lot of times that fish picks that up, your weight is sitting there on the bottom, that fish is moving to the side, or it's even moving kind of away or towards you, but because you're using a heavy weight, that line is still feeding directly to that weight and then to the fish. And so it's very important, anytime I get a hook set on a Carolina rig, I'm gonna I let the bass basically pull me down. I'm gonna reel 3 or 4 times and then set the hook, okay? And that allows me to get a really good hook set and also get any slack out of the line with the fish. So a couple of big tips there when it comes to the Carolina rig that I think are very important. Now the next thing I want to talk about quickly is the rod and reel setup. This is not a Carolina rig, so let's not confuse that. This is a Texas rig that I have set up here, but this is my Carolina rig rod. The reason that I left the Texas rig on there is because I also want to show you that this particular rod, I actually use it for a number of different things. Not only a Carolina rig, not only a Texas rig, but I also use this for swim baits. I've used it even for glide baits and had a lot of success with it. This is a really good all-around rod, but it is a perfect Carolina rig rod. So this is actually the ARC Invoker Pro Series. This is a 7 foot, 6 inch medium heavy power rod, and it's a fast action rod. It's labeled for weights from 1/4 ounce to 1 ounce, which I think are perfect when it comes to the Carolina rig. Now, as far as the main line goes, there are some guys that like to use a braid line, main line that goes to your swivel and then fluorocarbon past that. I do not think that that is a great idea, just because when you have a braid main line and you set the hook, you are putting a lot of pressure on that 3 foot leader, because there's no stretch in the rest of the system. There's no stretch in your rod, there's no stretch in the line. You put a lot of power, you put a lot of just energy into that 3 foot leader, and you will have break-offs at time with that leader. So you could try setting the hook a little bit less hard in that situation, or using a rod that has a little bit more give in that situation if you really like to use braid. But personally, I have stuck to using a 20-pound main fluorocarbon my whole life when it comes to Carolina rig fishing, and I really, really like that. I feel like I have a great hookup ratio, and I feel like I get pretty much every single fish in the boat. Actually, I can't even remember off the top of my head if I've ever lost a Carolina rig fish, period. But anyways, I do like to have a rod that has length. This is 7 foot 6 inches. I do like, and guys, I'm gonna leave a link for the rod and reel down below. Again, if you use the coupon code BFHQ over at ARC, you get 10% off. But when it comes to the reel, usually a pretty fast-paced reel is what you want. Anything in the 7s or 8s is going to be good. I have a 7.1-to-1 gear ratio reel on here because I use this rod a lot actually for glide baits as well, because although it's a fast action rod, it's labeled as a fast action, it does bend a little bit further down the blank, which is what I like sometimes for my glide bait fishing. But that's a really, really good rod and reel combo that I use exclusively with Carolina rigs. Now let's talk next about the baits. And the thing that you guys should know is that the first thing that you should know, Carolina rig baits can be anything and everything, and at times it literally does not matter. It does not matter at all what you put on a Carolina rig. I have been with guys before that have fished big giant worms on Carolina rigs, straight tail worms, little worms. There are a couple of baits that I like and that I throw the majority of the time, with the first one being the good old Zoom Ultra Speed, the good old Zoom Speed Crawl. This is by far probably my #1 Carolina rig bait. I have used this a ton, and if you fish a lot for smallmouth bass, this is like the deal, because I use a Carolina rig for smallmouth a lot too, and they absolutely eat this thing. Now with that being said, I catch a ton of largemouth with it as well. But something that I learned a long time ago, I actually got whooped in the back of the boat by a co-angler of mine fishing in a BFL. He was using a Carolina rig in this particular day. I didn't even have one set up. I was using an old monster worm. And he was using a Carolina rig, and on the back of it was a swim bait. He was actually using like a Bass Tricks swim bait, like a 5-inch Bass Tricks swim bait. It was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. And I always thought it was really interesting, just because you don't think of putting like shad style baits or swim baits on the back of a Carolina rig. And so anyways, he caught him really good. And I was like, dang, that's actually a really good idea. So anyways, over the last probably year, I've been playing with the bait a little bit, and I probably really shouldn't say this a whole lot because guys already hate this bait in general, but a really good bait to use on the back of a Carolina rig are these winged fluke style baits, or like a Depths Sakamata shad. Now the Depths Sakamata shad is a really hard bait to get a hold of. The Zoom winged fluke is very similar, and think about it guys, with that little wing on there that it does have, if you have that hook laying in there and you pull that thing across the bottom, it's gonna act a little bit like a plane, right? It's gonna kind of shoot up, and if you watch this thing in the water, if you have a little bit lighter wire hook, again, not too light, kind of that medium, if you pull this thing pops off the bottom and then has a really natural, cool action on the way down. This is a deadly little bait on the back of a Carolina rig, but again, there's a lot of them that you could fish. So anyways, guys, hope that you enjoyed this video. Hope I answered a lot of Carolina rig questions. If you have any more, let me know down below in the comments. Also, don't forget to check out that the fin fishing deal that I have listed down below as well. All right, see you guys in the next one.